Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I have a 2-for-1 card special for you. So get comfy and let's get crafty. Today I am using a new product in my craft room from Concord and 9th. This is the On My Mind stencil and die pack. It is a 3 stencil set with some coordinating dies. I'm also using one of the color combinations from the Sarah Renee Clark color cubes, and I've pulled out some Concord and 9th inks that match that color combination. I'm using a couple pieces of Nina Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock and my Simon Says stamp Positively Perfect sticky matte thingy that I can never remember the right words for. Okay, the first card we're going to go just with the stencils, exactly how it was designed to be. Each one of these 3 stencils has the registration marks in the corner. There is a little bit of stencil hanging out over the edge of my cardstock, so I'm comfortable just kind of pushing that down into my sticky mat. In order to prep my brushes, I want to use a blue background on this, kind of like you're looking out of a window into the outdoors. And my blue brush was a little bit stiff, so I just put a little bit of water onto a microfiber rag and moved that brush around in the wet spot until the bristles were moving freely. So this die and stencil and die set actually are not made to work as a 1 card unit. I don't know if I'm phrasing that right. So the stencils will cut out all of the shapes. The dies will cut out all of the shapes that the stencils color, but not in the same pattern or layout that the stencils color them in, which is why we're doing a 2-for-1 card special here today. So like I said, I want this to appear as though you are looking out a window and, indoor plants, and then they're sitting in a window, because most indoor plants like a little bit of sun, just not a lot of sun. So we have our background down. We're going to go ahead and add this next stencil. I don't think they're numbered, and I honestly don't think it really matters which one you start with, except maybe starting with the window is a little bit easier. But they're really well laid out. They're really easy to line back up. They do all have the registration marks, but I just used the ink blending. So we're going to go ahead and do the greenery. I'm cleaning out my green brush again. Some of them I haven't used in a long time. So, plus I wasn't sure what color, if it was a light green or a dark green I used last with this brush. So I have 3 colors of green. Did it end up looking like there was a lot of color variation in my greenery? No. If you wanted to have more of that color definition, it probably would be better to put a light color down and then use like pencils or alcohol markers to add in the detail. However, I don't care, I did it anyway. So on the bottom row of plants, I use the dark and the middle tone. On the middle row of plants, I use the middle tone and a light tone. And on the top row of plants, I just used the light color without cleaning off my brush, and then the light color after I cleaned off my brush. So it was, I didn't really re-ink, I guess is the right word. But this is a really fast stencil design, and it is super cute. And Concord and 9th has some really innovative products, and I will admit that while they're very cool, they're not all my jam. Like their turnabout, I think, is fantastic. I have a couple. They're not my jam, but mostly that's because I don't know. They're just not the first thing I reach for. Let's put it that way. But that's okay. There are plenty of things from Concord and 9th that are totally right up my alley. The third stencil is the plant pots. So in keeping with my color combination from my Sarah Renee Clark color cubes, I'm using a yellow and orange and a reddish. It's more of a tomatoey red, but it works. It's fall. They're fall colors. So I did a light and a dark for each of the plant pot colors. I had to say that real slow to make sure it came out in understandable English. I sound weird. I'm sorry. My allergies are kind of kicking up today. About a month ago, I went cold turkey on my allergy pills because it felt like they were not doing anything for me. I went to see an allergist, and I didn't have severe enough, like, my allergy testing didn't show that there was a severe enough allergy to be taking allergy meds every day. So I'm like, then why am I taking this? I cold turkeyed him, and this is the first time in a long time I felt any kind of congestion. So sorry, I sound weird. That was a really long way to say sorry, I sound weird. It's been a day. It's been a day. Once I have my plant pots all ink blended out, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off that stencil. And then before I moved on to the next part, I cleaned off the stencils with a baby wipe just to make sure I didn't transfer any of that red anywhere that I didn't want it. So to use the dies, you can see the dies right there. All of the plant pots are in one die, and all of the plant greenery is in one die. So I grabbed a piece of Nina and I put those two dies onto my cutting plate, and I cut them all out with my Empress machine. And then I tapped them all out of the dies and put them into I have these little bowls that I got at Target. They're like $3 for $1 in the college section a couple years ago. And that's where I put all my die cuts when I'm using them. And then I put my sticky mat back down, and I'm using this little Cricut spatula scraper thing. I use it all the time for not just my Cricut stuff. I use it all the time. And then I use this pickup stick to make sure all of my greenery was turned right side up so that I could get it ink blended. I picked up all of the plant pots and put them into a dish for now. I'm going to do the greenery first, and then we'll come back and do the plant pots in a minute. But I'm going to put all the greenery parts of the plants onto my sticky mat, and then I'm going to bring in a much smaller ink blending brush. This is one that I got from Tailored Expressions. And I'm going to just dab instead of blend the light color at first. And then I will do a little more of the blending motion as I add a darker color. It worked. Again, this is something you could cut these out and use your colored pencils or your alcohol markers or any kind of whatever inks you use to ink blend and get more definition if you really, really wanted to, I guess is the right word. I was much less concerned with detail than I was about getting color on the pieces. They're not the tiniest dies I've ever used, but they're also not the largest dies I've ever used. So the sticky mat was kind of like the perfect tool to use this for. They didn't move around anywhere. I am dabbing off my brush onto that scrap paper just to make sure I don't get any of those. When you're ink blending, if you go right from your ink pad to your die cut or your paper that you're blending on, you get kind of that blob, the blob of ink that's shaped like your blending brush. Dabbing it off will prevent that. So we are going to go back in and use the same yellow, orange, and red combinations for our plant pots. And I'm actually doing them, the same ones are yellow, the same ones are orange, the same ones are red. And that's just because then you get to see how the card looks when you use the dies versus when you just use the stencils. I thought I have one color palette, I have one color plan. I did change the background on the die cut card. I did not use a blue background, the whole looking out through a window thing. I did shake it up a little bit there, but the same colors were on both cards. So I feel like it still kind of flows together pretty well. Not that it has to. If you're making more than one card with the same products, you do not have to make them match. You can make them completely different, especially if you are a person like me who often your cards are made for a specific person or occasion. And you can make them match the person's personality or color scheme or whatever you want. So here we're going to go back to our first card. I wanted to kind of cut an arch out to go around that window. So I pulled out my Spellbinders Essential Arches dies. I'm sure that Concord and 9th has something like this. I don't have them, but I have the Spellbinders ones. So I did have to figure out which one would be the best fit. I did end up going with like the third largest one. And I'm going to cut that arch out of some gold cardstock. Now this gold cardstock that I have is from a pad of gold cardstock from Joann's like $2 craft supply bin. I think it's a little 6x6 pad. I think it has 12 pieces of gold cardstock, and it was like $2 or $3. I found them a couple years ago at Christmas time, and I bought all the gold and silver that they had in the bin. Because for $3, why not? Sorry. All right, so I've taken the die that I know is the size that I need, and then the die just smaller, and I've arranged them on my craft mat, and I'm taping them together with some painter's tape, and I'm cutting them out to make a frame, a small arched frame. This is going to go over the top of the first card we made, the stenciled card. So once I have that all cut out, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the, what did I do? Oh, I needed to make a frame. So that frame actually is for the die cut card. I wanted to make a frame for the stenciled card as well. And I did the same thing, except this time I went one die larger. I used the stenciled card panel to determine which die I needed for my die cut card. So, and then I used the same cutout and a larger die to make the frame for the ink blended card, the stencil blended card. That was a lot of words to explain that. I'm a little bit, I've been substitute teaching in 4th grade, so I feel like my ability to explain things might be slightly less than usual right now. I did trim this panel down to be 4 by 5 1/4 inches because if you've been here before, you know I like the frame. I did select a green cardstock out of my stash. I do not know what color this is, and I do not know what brand this is. I would bet money that it's a Stampin' Up! One, but it could also be my favorite things, an old My Favorite Things color. I honestly don't know. I don't label my cardstock. I pick it by color, not by brand or, yeah. So I am going to take my ATG and put some double-sided adhesive on the back of this card panel and adhere it down to the front of our green card base. I am using the grid squares on my craft mat to line it up. And when I turn it sideways, I can see 3 edges. And that lets me know that at least by eyeball, I've got it centered. And then I'm going to take this frame that we made. This was the second frame we made. And I'm going to add some glue with my Bearly Arts glue to the back of this frame. This frame was itty bitty narrow. And even though this was a thicker than average metallic cardstock, it was still a little bit on the hard to get laid down flat size. It took a minute. I was fidgety. It took a minute. But it does cover up some of the leaves, but that's okay. That just adds to the idea that you're looking into or out of a window. So in this die set, there is this friend die, and then Concord and 9th also has this, it's called Mix and Match Everyday Sentiment. It is a solid stamp that has a coordinating die, and it looks like black labels, right? It is longer than a quarter piece of cardstock, so I had to grab a full-size piece of cardstock and then cut it down and use a half a sheet. That's what I'm trying to say. I told you guys I'm a little bit out of it today. I used half of a sheet of Neenah cardstock to stamp this solid stamp, and it does take some stamping. I used my Versaclair ink pad. I stamped it twice. It really could have stamped a third time. I will be 100% honest. My Versaclair ink pad probably needs to be re-inked, but also I could have stamped this a third time and got a much better coverage. But I was okay with it looking a little bit like not like that. That just looks not stamped, right? But after I inked up my stamp and stamped it down a second time, I did add a little bit more pressure. I did stand up and give it a little bit of what is lovingly known as the CPR method with my Misty lid. I stood up and put a little more pressure. So you can see my head in the frame there. Just to see if I could get a little bit more coverage. It's not perfect, but I'm okay with it. It looks a little bit rustic or handmade kind of. So I am going to go ahead and line up the die. I did tape it down because I don't want it to move and not cut out those words properly. But what it does is it cuts out all these little word chunks. So also I'm going to use that gold cardstock to cut out the friend die. And this friend die has the tittle, and I picked it up on my pickup stick, and then I put the cap on my pickup stick so that I didn't lose my tittle. And I don't know how come this is the first time I ever thought to do that, but it was genius in my mind to put the tittle on the sticky end and then put the cap on that pickup stick. I mean, how could I lose it? I thought I'm like, how did I never think of this before? I'm sure somebody has, but I don't know how come I never thought of this before. So once I had the friend word down, I went ahead and put a little dot of glue. I pulled off the cap. There's my tittle right there, ready to go on to my friend word. And then I can nestle this little hello label right down inside there. And this card says, hello, friend. I am going to grab a piece of white copy paper that is trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches and add it to the inside of my card. And then all we have left to do is finish up our second card. For the background of my second card, I pulled out the Altenew wood wall, I think it's called. It's a 3D cutting or 3D embossing folder. Let me see if I can find it and tell you the name of it. It's called Window Slats. It's called Window Slats, and it gives you kind of this blinds, like the vertical blinds that you hang in your windows. It gives kind of that vibe. So I sent the whole quarter sheet of cardstock through. This is a cream cardstock, and I want to put the arch on, but I also want to recreate like the shelf thing. So I grabbed a piece of brown cardstock from my cardstock scrap pile and a wood grain embossing folder. This is an old Stampin' Up! One. Everybody has one. You can find a wood grain embossing folder probably in your stash. And then I took this embossed piece of brown paper and made 3 1/4 inch strips. And then I grabbed a brown Concord and 9th ink and just blended up the edges to give a little bit of depth or shadow, you know, kind of a perception of depth to these little shelves. Then the next part was like the hardest part of this whole card, I think. I had to figure out how to get my shelves to stick, my skinny shelves to stick to my skinny frame, to stick down to my embossed panel on my card. It's a lot. It's a lot. But the thing I decided to do was pull out that first stencil, the one that does the background, that's open for the background. And that way I knew how far apart the shelves needed to be in order for my plants and greenery to fit. And then I could figure out where to put my arch as well. But the little shelves kept slipping around because, you know, the stencil's not exactly sticky. So I grabbed my Post-it tape and I put a little Post-it tape on the right hand end of each of those each of the shelves as they hang off of the stencil. And that worked-ish. The left-hand sides were not necessarily, they were a little free-floating still. So I lined the shelves up with the shelf on the stencil. And I looked at my arch to see where it was going to hit that bottom stencil. And then I added glue to the shelves. I added just a little dot of glue so at least I could get it together. And then I can take it off the stencil and add more glue to make it be a permanent hold. And I'm picking it up with my little spatula thing, and that little shelf does not stay attached. I told you this was the hardest part of this whole entire card, was getting these little shelves to stay attached to the arch. But eventually I did succeed. I was able to get enough glue in there to hold them in place. And then I just pulled out a pair of scissors and trimmed down the shelves trimmed off the edge of the shelves so that they just line up with the edge of my arch there. And even that top one, it still kept kind of flipping up. I don't even know. I obviously did not have enough glue there. However, I Tim gunned it all the way and I made it work. So now that we have the shelves attached to the arch, we're going to put some glue on the back of the shelves. We're going to put some glue on that arch. And we are going to glue this down to our embossed cardstock, our window slat. So this is kind of like the blinds are closed. Like it's nighttime. The blinds are closed. The plants don't need sunlight anyway. I don't know. I leave my blinds open because my daughter's cat plays them if we don't. And I don't, the cat needs to not tear apart the blinds. So I am going to go ahead and pull my plant pots out of my little dish with my pickup tool, my little sticky tool. And I'm putting them on this card the same way they were on the other card. And that's just a comparison thing. But again, you do whatever you want. This does not have to be, like I didn't use any foam tape. I didn't use any kind of dimensional adhesive. I just glued them right down to that embossed background. There is 1,000 ways to use this die that has nothing to do with how I've done it. But I kind of want, this is the first time I played with it. So I went with the most obvious. Yeah, that's how I roll. The first time I use my products, I use them in the most obvious way possible. That's just, it is what it is. So once I had all of the card pot, oh my gosh, that was not even words. Plant pots put down or glued down, adhered down, whatever. I did go ahead and put all the greenery in, and I matched the greenery up to, I pulled that other card over, and I matched the greenery up to how it would have been stenciled in. And part of that is because then I knew it would fit in the shelves. Now, on this top shelf, a couple of the pieces of, like on the plants on the side, they're going to overhang that shelf a little bit as opposed to be behind it, like on the stenciled image. That's okay. It just means that on this particular plant shelf, the greenery is growing out of the arch, like in front of the arch instead of tucked back in behind the arch. It just adds a little bit of depth and perception to, or perception of depth to the card, however you want to say that. This was a little bit finicky because by this point in the card making process, there is glue all over my fingers. And I know if you've been here before, you've heard me say that glue is my crafty nemesis because sometimes it is absolutely the best adhesive for the project. But inevitably, I end up with glue all over my fingers. So it was a little bit touch and go for some of these little plants that wanted to stick to my fingers more than they wanted to stick to the card base. But we got her done. Once I have all of the greenery down, it is time to find a card base for this card. And I went ahead and chose a card base that is the same color as the shelves. I just felt like that. It grounded it because it's a neutral, but it also pulled it all together. So we've got all of the plants in, all the plant pots in. We're going to make a card base. Both of these cards are US A2 size. That means that they are 4 1/4 inches wide by 5.5 inches tall. They are portrait style and they are top folding. Somewhere along the line, that just became my favorite way to make a card. It started with embossing folders. When I first started using embossing folders, that was the easiest way to emboss the front panel of your card, was to make it a top folding card. To me, it was. For the sentiment on this card, I pulled out this Simon Says stamp set. It's called Tiny Words. It has teeny tiny sentiments. I tried a couple of other things and they were just too big. They covered up too much and I didn't like it. So I pulled out a stamp block because my other stamp is still in my MISTI waiting to be cleaned at this point. And I inked it up with that brown ink and I stamped it onto that cream cardstock. It would have looked better. I 100% admit this. It would have looked better if I had used the brown cardstock from the shelf and then white or gold heat embossed it on the sentiment onto the brown cardstock. This cream colored cardstock almost just blends right in. And the sentiment is so tiny and so fine that it's not my favorite. But at this point, I had already tried 3 or 4 different things and I was just going to make it work. So now we have our copy paper inside our card, and the cards are finished. I did decide at the last minute, and it's only because my gel pen was still sitting on my desk, let's be honest, that these ink blended pots could use a little bit of something. So on one pot on each row, I just added some white gel pen detail to one pot per row. I was not going to go and deck them all out. One has dots, one has stripes, one has curly cues. But I am low-key in love with this stencil and die set. I can see so many ways, both the way it was intended and other ways to use these products. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I have a couple other videos here I think you will enjoy. If you liked today's video, go ahead and subscribe and give me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below if you want to, and I hope you have a really fabulous day.